You get this particularly at youth events where the expectation is the more you build a song, the more you're going to feel Jesus.
Hello and welcome to Deconstructing Worship, a series of positive and constructive conversations about the current culture of modern worship. We are your hosts, Steve Quantick
and Kyle Treble.
And hello, welcome! It's very, very exciting to be here for episode 3. Whoop whoop!
Whoop whoop!
Yeah.
How you doing, Abbie?
Good, thank you. Good, yeah.
Good. It's good to have you on, and it's nice. I am the stranger to you, kind of like the last episode as well. So it's going to be really cool. It's like a really cool conversation with someone who I have no idea about them. So it's going to be really fun.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting.
Yeah, so just to introduce Abbie from my point of view, I first met Abbie, probably at my first ever session worship gig, right? Because Tim Williams, who at the time was the kind of worship pastor at Southville Church in Yeovil, asked me to basically, I essentially ended up spending the whole summer playing with him. We played at a youth weekend down south, didn't we? And then ended up spending like the majority of 2018 on tour with Southville Music, which is really, really fun.
That's really cool. How often were you doing? I was going to say gigs. We'll just go with gig. I know that word's stigmatized in the church as well, isn't it? You can't say that one. How often were you doing worship conferences?
Well, some months we did it every week, and some months we only did it once a month, so it wasn't hugely consistent. But there was one period of time where we actually went to Northern Ireland and we did 4 days in a row in Northern Ireland.
Cool. I'd love to go to Ireland. Excuse my ignorance. Where is Southville?
So Southville, it's actually the name of our local church in Yeovil. So the band ended up getting named after the road that the church is on, and then the church also ended up getting because we thought Southville. Well, I think it was my boss Tim at the time came up with the idea, but he thought it was a cool name. So
yeah, I like it. I was kind of like, is it got like a meaning, or is it literally just a place called Southville?
It's just a place called Southville. We quite often get mistaken for Smallville, which is quite funny.
Yeah.
So Tim Williams, who was the worship pastor when he came in, he had quite an interesting kind of experience when he first came into Southville, right? Because he joined the church, and then a lot of kind of long-serving members of the worship team were like, "Oh my goodness, thank goodness somebody's here to lead worship," and then left, right? They left the worship.
Yeah, it was actually, it's a sad but also quite a funny story. Sorry, Tim, it is quite funny. But Tim was probably only a little bit older than me when he first came to Southville. I think he was like 21, 22. And he was like, he'd done some really cool experiences. I think he'd done Holy Trinity Brompton, which is a big church. He'd done a lot with Elam Sound and stuff. So he knew what he was doing. And basically he came to Southville of a worship team of people who hadn't really got a clue what we were doing, including myself. Like I was maybe like 13 or 14 at the time. So I was very new. Didn't really know what I was doing. The worship team was mainly like older people. No offense to older people, obviously. But yeah, we were quite dated, I guess. Like the piano was actually like, it was one of those kind of electric big pianos. It was not a nice sounding synthy keyboard. Like, yeah, there was a lot of room for improvement. But obviously because we were so set in our ways, having this new kind of younger, cooler person come in, a lot of people kind of thought, I'm not good enough, I'm not cool enough for this, and they just left. So it kind of left the team. It was basically just him, and it was me, like a 13-year-old child, Karen, my friend, who was also like 12, and that was like the entire team.
Wow, you see that happen a lot, don't you, when kind of like leadership changes, like a massive part of team or congregation tend to leave as well. It's a very odd phenomenon.
Yeah, at the time it was quite shocking because I think to be honest, the people that left were getting close towards leaving, and I think when they saw Tim come, they thought it was a bit of a relief that somebody was there to take over. So it was like a combination of lots of different things, but yeah, everyone just left at the same time and left us with about 3 of us to run the services. So
that's good. You can build up from the roots.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is exactly what happened.
So was that a good, was that kind of a positive experience for you, or did you just kind of feel like, oh my gosh, well, I guess I have to step up then?
Wow, it was a bit both, to be fair. So to begin with, it was very much because obviously 13-year-old me with very little experience was like, oh man, like this is not going to go well. I don't know what I'm doing. This is too much for me. Like we have quite a small church. It's about 150 people, so it wasn't like too daunting, but it was definitely a lot of responsibility. At the time, I hadn't had a huge amount of experience properly worshipping and properly connecting with God, probably just because of my age. So for me at the time, I very much thought it was kind of, this is quite performancey. People are going to be judging how good I am at playing. So yeah, and it was also the same for obviously my friend Karen. She'd only just stepped up to worship leading. We'd basically gone from, me and her used to lead worship for the children, like the 4 or 5-year-old kids who haven't really got a clue about what it sounds like. So stepping up from doing that to doing full-on adults who are fully paying attention to what we're doing was definitely very daunting.
Yeah, everyone is now watching me fully.
Exactly, yeah, fully judging. One of the worst things that happened very early on is that at the end of communion, I'd left the synth pad on and it was beautiful. Like everyone was calm. It was such a lovely atmosphere, and I hit the beatbox button.
Yes, yes.
Classic
See, those are the moments. They're the great moments.
So would you say that you're kind of that this kind of being thrown in the deep end in terms of leading worship, how did that kind of work for you in terms of connecting with God and how that developed?
It genuinely brought it to a whole new level. I think because for me, the style of music changed very much at the same time as Tim came in. So we were picking out newer songs, not necessarily like brand new, but ones where the lyrics resounded a lot more with me. And at that point I started going, oh, actually, like these words mean something to me. Like I'm feeling something inside of me that's actually I'm resonating with, and it's kind of, I'm feeling a connection with God because of that, because as much as I love some of the older songs, I just didn't understand some of the words, and I was just singing them but not meaning them. So that was like a kind of a big deal for me.
No, that's great. I understand that because I came to kind of be a follower of Jesus when like kind of later on in life at 18. So some of like when I came to church and they would do like the older ones, and this isn't to take a shot at these ones because they're like, now I understand them and they're beautiful, amazing songs. But at the time, as a new Christian, I was like, I really have no idea what you're saying. So yeah,
exactly.
I get
sometimes
you
just need it simplified, don't you? Because don't get me wrong, now that I've grown in my faith and I understand the Bible more, listening back to hymns, I just think, wow, like those words are amazing. Like they're so biblical, so true. But at the time, I just kind of thought, well, this is a load of rubbish. Like what does this mean?
What are you saying?
Yeah,
it's like when you're at secondary school and you're studying, and you're forced to study Shakespeare.
Yeah,
literally. And you feel like you're being forced to study Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And then, like a few years later, you're like, oh my gosh, he's legitimately one of the greatest playwrights who ever lived.
100%.
Yeah, but at the time you're like, this guy kind of sucks. And you look back and you go, wow, I said Shakespeare sucks. Wow.
Exactly. So then later on, there was the Southville Music Project. So, so the church kind of set out, just to fill you in, Carl, they set out to try and write 100 songs in a year.
Okay.
And then try to pick the best of those songs. We'll probably talk to Tim. We're having Tim on the podcast. I don't know if it's later this series or next series. I guess we will talk to him in a bit more detail about that. But in terms of like songwriting, were you involved in that much?
I did have some involvement. This was something that was so brand new to me. I'd never done it before in my life. So it was kind of, I mean, I did like a GCSE music, but that was pretty much it as far as my musical ability went. So I kind of thought, this isn't for me. But it was actually beautiful what they did. They basically, Howard and Tim got together and they just said, anyone in the church, you can write any lyrics, send them in to us, we'll do something with them. And we actually had I think she was like a 98-year-old woman, and she was housebound, and she would literally sit at home and write lyrics and send them in. It was absolutely beautiful.
Wow.
But, in terms of my involvement, it was kind of, what I felt I could do better was listen to something that they'd given me and then say what my opinion of it was and give feedback rather than actually writing them myself. That's what I felt that I was better at. And also the other thing that I thought I could do all right was change certain words. So it's kind of like finding synonyms, I guess. So just words that I thought sounded slightly better than the ones that they'd used.
Yeah, but that's a great start.
But yeah, in terms of the actual songwriting, I didn't do a huge amount, but it was great to just be a part of and just watch happen. It was amazing.
I think people massively underestimate the importance of somebody being there from an editorial point of view, right? Because it's so
100%.
It's so easy to kind of write something, work on it really hard, and think that's sacred and can never be changed. and then somebody like you can come in and go like, oh, what if you change this word? And like, you know, perfect. You know what I mean?
Thinking of the church itself as a community, but like songwriting and art in itself, kind of, it can be very solo. But it's when you open it up to more of a communal aspect of writings, when you kind of get things that are really unexpected and you kind of create stuff that's like, whoa.
Yeah, totally.
Just to kind of bring us into to kind of the whole like idea of unpicking some things about congregational worship. Obviously, for the majority of churches, it's not their experience that they're singing homegrown music. They're not singing music that springs from within the church. It's often, you know, music from America or Australia, or churches like, you know, like at the time when I was growing up, it was like Soul Survivor and things like that. So 2 questions, right? So first question is like, what would you kind of say to kind of encourage people, who, you know, encourage songwriters within local congregations, and how did that benefit Southville as a church?
I think my biggest piece of advice would be, you were always important enough. Like we just discussed, with this slightest little change makes such a big difference. And for me at the time, as an intern, I was super unconfident with everything that I did. I had a lot of doubt in my own ability. And like when you're quite an introverted, quiet person, one thing that I find people like that often are able to do is to phrase things in their head and come out with it like after having thought about it quietly for a while, and it just changes everything. So I think probably my biggest piece of advice would be, don't ever think that your small change is irrelevant and not big enough. Like, it's not about the big things, it's about every little detail that comes together to build up one big thing. So like, if you're a new songwriter, if you've written 2 lines and you love those 2 lines but you hate the rest of the song, don't scratch the entire song. Like, take those 2 lines and take them to somebody else and be like, I've come up with these 2 lines, I love them.
Yeah.
Can you come up with the rest of the song? Can we work together? And I think with Southville songs, that's what made all the difference. Like, loads of people came up with tiny little bits, but when you bring them all together to make one stunning thing, basically. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that, like, just kind of keeping hold of little nuggets every now and then, especially as you're kind of growing in that art form. I was watching, I've kind of been going back onto a bit of a Blink-182 binge the past kind of couple of months. And I was watching the Blink-182 documentary, which I used to kind of watch every week when I was about 18. And there's this one section which I didn't realize, and he's kind of running through guitar ideas, and it's actually the riff that they end up using on a song like 10 years later or something like that. I've probably got the years wrong, but just that one little riff that wasn't ready then for an album or a song ended up becoming something later on. I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
And how did it kind of have an impact on the worship life of the church? Like standing up to lead worship and like, these are songs that we wrote, you know, how do they kind of stack up alongside kind of the ones that weren't written by the church?
Yeah, it really hits different when you're singing lyrics that you've written yourself, even if somebody else in the church wrote it. Just the knowledge that as a church we've come up with this. One of the stories that resonated with me the most, our pastor Howard, his daughter Claudia, she at a very young age, maybe like 1 or 2 years old, she got meningitis. And what came out of that is that she was in hospital. Essentially, I believe they were told that they didn't think that she was going to make through it. And when the church came together to pray about that, through that, Howard started writing a song about it. Well, not like specifically about the situation, but with words of encouragement to get through it. And like, I get so emotional talking about this even now. But everybody wrote in little lyrics to build this song, which is called Every Call. If anyone wants to listen to it for some encouragement, it is a brilliant song. But basically what came out of the song is we were declaring this song over the situation. The lyrics for bridge are, there's nothing too small, there's nothing too much, you hear every call. And wow. Basically, as this was being sung, we started to believe that this was going to happen over the situation. And basically Claudia, the child, she actually took her first steps on Easter Sunday.
Oh wow.
And she made a full recovery with absolutely no side effects. And so whenever we sing that song now, all of us in the church, we think of that, like, that's going to resound with us probably for the rest of our lives. So yeah, it does hit different when you've got a song that means so much to you as a church.
Yeah, well, you kind of taken a song that it's become more than words. It's become like this thing that you've physically lived out, which is what we want with all the things we sing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first question that we always ask our guests, Abbie, is what's the kind of first experience that you remember of congregational worship?
So the first one that I can remember really clearly actually was it was at an Elim event at Minehead, and I was actually only 5 years old at the time. But basically we were all in this really big blue tent, and I kind of became very aware of what was going on for the first time that I can remember in my life. Like, I could see all these people singing around me, but something inside me knew that they weren't just singing a song like happily. I kind of remember 5-year-old me thinking there's definitely something more going on here, just not. And obviously, like, I've grown up in a Christian family, so I knew that it was a church gathering. But and that was actually the year that I made the decision to become a Christian at 5 years old.
Wow,
that's awesome.
Because of that experience at the time, I think, I wanted to get to know this. I was like, I want to be able to experience this. So that was where I made like my first decision to become a Christian. So yeah, that's the first event that I remember.
Cool. All right. So second question. Okay, what would you say? And obviously, I'm guessing this would change kind of as years go on. But what would you say right now? What is your favorite thing about worship?
So I think my favorite thing about worship is that I find it's the main way that I connect to God. Like, I can pray, I can fast, I can have discussions with people, but the one thing that I find without fail that always helps me connect with God is worship music. Like, the minute like the first synth comes in, I'm just like, yes, like I'm feeling it. And also, just I think for me it's the ability to properly be involved in it as well. Obviously when you're praying, it's generally like a one-to-one conversation with God. Whereas with worship music, for me, it's also sharing my passion of Jesus. And I find it's actually the easiest link to share with my non-Christian friends. Like, it's such an easy thing to slip in there. Like, what do you do for a hobby? And I'm like, I play keys in a worship band. And then boom, it's just
that's
there.
Awesome.
I find that for some reason, the lyrics in worship songs, just like I connect with them so much more than anything that's spoken to me. One of my absolute favourite songs of all time is Another in the Fire. And just all of the lyrics of that, they just speak to me. And the very last line is, I find the joy in every battle because I know that's where you'll be. And like, this entire year and last year has just been such a huge battle for me, and I'd always find myself going to bed at night singing that lyric in my head and thinking, like, I can find the joy in this because it is there. And I just find that I can't find those kind of words in something that's written down or spoken to me. Like, occasionally it does happen, but I always find they're in a worship song somewhere.
Yeah. Well, no, like, music is really powerful, and like, even just kind of scientifically, like, I remember watching this documentary. It's only a short one, and it was about people with Alzheimer's, and go into this old person's home. And it was the most beautiful video. And this guy, and he couldn't really remember anything. He couldn't really talk anymore. He would kind of just slump in his chair, and that would be what he did all day. And these people came, and they played some hymns in sort of through some headphones from when he was younger. And he like started moving, and his arms start jigging, and he's like mouthing the lyrics to these songs, not fully making the full words, but like you can see his eyes just lit up. And I'm like, if it can do that, if it can kind of like rejuvenate memories that have kind of from every other aspect of life look like they're completely gone, like, what
I've
can
seen
it
that
do?
in action. Yeah,
Have you?
My granddad, he unfortunately passed away last week, but he had quite advanced dementia, and every time we play, like, even just a classical piece of music, like you said, like, his whole face would just light up. He'd be like waving his arms around, he'd be conducting in the air, and just, if he was ever really distressed or upset, like, we would just put music on, and every time it would just calm him right down. He'd be back to, like, almost like his old self would come back and just be there for the time being. Like, yeah, it's amazing. It's incredible what music does to the brain. It really is.
Yeah. I'm really sorry that you've lost your granddad, by the way.
Thank you.
Was your granddad kind of a part of your faith walk?
100%. He used to be a preacher. So he's been such an incredible man of God his entire life. He's never doubted his faith. He's stood by everyone through the hardest of times. Like, he always used to do this thing when he was preaching to make sure that everybody was listening, where he'd ask people to go, "Yes, Jeff," if they agreed with what he was saying. So it was actually really sweet. So he'd say like a line and then he'd pause and wait for it, and like the whole congregation
yes,
would
Jeff.
just go, "Yes, Jeff." Yeah. Yeah, no, he was incredible. He really was. Yeah, he made everyone's life so much better.
So I guess let's bring it round to the final question.
So this is the hard hitter, this one is.
Yeah, this is the hardcore question. But you know, the reason we did this podcast. So in terms of like we've talked so much about all the positive things that you love about congregational worship, but if you could change one thing about it, what would it be?
I would change how inclusive it is, which is controversial to say that, I know that, but basically from what my experience has been of worship music, it has to be a certain way, otherwise you can't connect as such. Like for me, worship music, I know there are different types of worship music out there, but the ones that are predominantly used in churches, you have your synth, like you have your certain sounds, you have like certain melodies and stuff, and they all sound like, when you listen to Christian songs, yes, they're all different, but they all have very similar vibes. And I kind of, I find it difficult personally that it's quite a slim genre. And I mean, I would love for us to be able to do like, it sounds so stupid, but like a reggae song or something, like in a different way.
You.
Yeah, like I wish we could include more varieties of worship music, like even just for different cultures, because I know that there's so many different cultures over the globe who have different music, such as African music or like tribal music, and we don't really get to experience any of that. And I think it's amazing, and it's such a, like, I personally would love to travel the world and get to experience that, because my only real experience of worship music is your standard white people on stage playing the electric guitars and the keys and the classic pop song kind of style. Like, so for me, the one thing that I would change would be like to include more cultural songs, I guess.
Like there can be like, I think almost an expectation that worship music just is just one size fits all, like bolt on thing. Whereas I think you're absolutely right. There should be space for churches to, like, it could just be, you know, stylistically, you know, they could like, they have, you know, you can have all this music that comes from like, Bethel and Hillsong and all that jazz, but they could do it in their own style. Like, you know, you could have people, we talked about it like with Davey last week, didn't we, Carl? Just like he goes to a church that's like hardcore musicians mainly, and people who love hardcore music, and it's all riffy and screamy, and that's what they love. Because again, what we kind of discovered last week is that if you allow the musical culture of, you know, an indigenous musical culture to make its way into worship music, the culture of that music scene starts to make its way in as well. In the case of hardcore music, that's like a very passionate, very inclusive ethos. Like they welcome everyone. They welcome everyone at their church. Are we denying ourselves of the opportunity to, you know, by making worship this one size fits all thing, or at least stylistically, are we denying ourselves the opportunity to express who we are as a congregation by kind of striking this delicious but vanilla flavour?
Delicious but vanilla.
Like what I also find, and don't get me wrong, I absolutely love it, and I personally find it helps a lot, but you get this particularly at youth events where the expectation is the more you build a song, the more you're going to feel Jesus. So the bigger and bigger the song gets, like the more and more you're kind of going, the Holy Spirit is falling now.
It's the holy build. It's the holy build with the holy synth.
Literally, and don't get me wrong, I love it, but sometimes it just sits a little bit wrong with me, and I'm like, why is it that we're when it's building, we're expecting the Holy Spirit to fall? And actually, from personal experience, I used to 12 years old actually, I was quite hurt by an experience where basically the song was building massively, and everybody around me was absolutely like screaming out, crying, hands in the air, people falling on their knees, and I was just stood there and I was like, I am feeling absolutely nothing. And then I felt awful then, because I was like, well, the song's building, I must have to feel something. I was like, you know, we've got the kick drum coming in proper, we've got like screaming synth. I was like, I should be feeling something. This is the part of the song where I should be feeling something. And I feel like that is quite an expectation with worship music. And don't get me wrong, it works a lot of the time and I do love it, but it sometimes it does sit a little bit wrong with me.
Yeah. But it's like you said, it's when all the songs are that way. Like I'm kind of where you are. Like there's so many songs that are in this kind of spacey rock genre that I absolutely love. But because it is very vanilla and it doesn't change very much, it does become an expectation, doesn't it? And you can see it in the congregation. Like they almost wait for these build sections before they let themselves go, and they kind of like fully engage in the worship. And that's not their fault. I think it's this culture we've built, isn't it? Like we kind of go, oh, here comes the build. This is when you just fully cry out to God. It's like you can do that if there's like an out of tune harmonica and just one, like, do you know what I mean? But yeah, I completely get what you're saying there.
Which leads into kind of my other sort of third point to this, which was if you're in a smaller church and you can't get that sound, there sometimes is an expectation that you can't therefore have the same worship experience. Like,
yeah.
I found myself guilty of that, like, because at one point Southville was a great band as well as being a great worship team. Like musically we were with it and it was good. So I would then go to a smaller church where perhaps it was like a crappy keyboard and an out of tune guitar, and for me that was all I could think about then. I wasn't thinking about how beautiful their hearts were standing up there and worshipping. Like for me that was all I could think about, and then I was like, well, there's no way you could have a worship experience when the band is that terrible. Like, and that is just, it's just so wrong to think like that. But I feel like we just fool ourselves, like we end up falling into that.
Yeah, like you didn't have like people who had musical degrees in the early church. Do you know what I mean? You may have had a few, but do you know what I mean? They weren't kind of like people have been studying the ins and outs of like the minutiae of music to then be able to lead a people in worship. It's so much more simpler than that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think it's not something we should be afraid of talking about in terms of, you know, it's okay that as human beings, certain musical or arrangement ideas get us hyped up, and it's not something we should be afraid of discussing. I think that sometimes it's just hype. Sometimes we are just getting emotionally hyped up because, you know, like, you know, I just think about, you know, the second Trolls film. I don't know if you guys have seen the Trolls films, but like, there's like a section at the start where there's this huge rave and there's this big disco and there's this build and it's going and going and going, and everyone in the audience are like, do the drop, and they finally do. You know what I mean? And it's just like that's kind of, you know, emotional hyping, which is a swear word in a lot of worship bands. But actually, we are emotional beings, and I don't know if we should be afraid of the fact that we get emotionally hyped up by certain things. You know, it doesn't mean God's not in that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's whether you leave it there or you take it forward into other places in your life. And this is speaking from experience, I've definitely been in that place of my life where I have just kind of not really been on a great kind of walk with God in my kind of time at home, and then I would be at church on a Sunday and I would let these songs kind of, and this is a great thing and it's a tool that God uses. I mean, like, God created this in us. Like you said, I don't think we should talk negatively all the time about this, but for me, like, I would kind of get hyped up and it's like, yeah, and then like the song's finished and I'm right back where I was. Do you know what I mean? I'm kind of right back where I was in my relationship with God. I'm right back where I was in my kind of theology or whatever the thing is. I think if we allow that hype to push us forward, then it's an amazing tool and a really, really great thing, and actually a really holy thing. Do you know what I mean? Because like God created that in us, those reactions in us, but it has to be that kind of momentum forward after that hype, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Like sometimes, you know, like me and my wife Katie talk about, you know, just talk about sometimes you just need a good cry. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I remember, like, you know, when just before we got married, we needed to test her waterproof mascara because, you know, she was expecting to cry at our wedding. And so we watched The Notebook, and I'd never seen it.
Oh, no.
No, don't watch that.
That is so sad.
No, it was the perfect test because she put on this waterproof mascara beforehand. And
did it hold? Did it hold?
One of them did. One of them did. The other one didn't. So it did its job. But goodness me, even though that was kind of like almost an engineered like evening of weeping, man, was it cathartic, Like it was just so good to kind of have that emotional release. Like sometimes you just need to cry. I think sometimes you need to just throw yourself in emotionally into a time of worship and get yourself to that place, I guess.
Well, I find I'm one of those people that bottles it all up to be released in one go, and that's an example of like hype being good, because sometimes I need those moments where I can just like release, cry, do whatever I need to do, and it's okay, because it's that moment of the song where it's okay to do that. Like it's okay to have that release. So that's a good thing about it. Obviously there are good things and there are bad things, but especially if you're like me and you feel like you bottle it all up to everybody else, and you just need that one moment to just get out of your system. Yeah,
almost kind of gives you permission.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
It's so cool, because I think as well it's just like those moments. I think you get a lot of talk about emotionalism, don't you, in terms of worship music, and like and by the way, for the record, I am team sloppy wet kiss. Unforeseen Kiss is the wrong lyrics.
I disagree.
It's the wrong lyrics. It's not the lyrics John Mark McMillan wrote, and it was never supposed to be a worship song.
Nobody likes a sloppy wet kiss.
What is the lyric?
Heaven meets earth like a sloppy wet kiss.
I think it's horrible.
I like it.
I knew you would. Exactly. There's negative talk about emotionalism, and it almost kind of ignores the fact that we're emotional beings. Because, and I think maybe it comes down to, I don't know if it's related. I don't know what you guys think. Maybe it's related to how we kind of deify and hold up the intellect of theological study. You know what I mean? Because, the intellect of theological study can be quite emotionally disconnected.
It can. It really, really can. I found this kind of like when I've gone into more kind of theological studies and stuff like that. Like I don't kind of tend to do that stuff very often. I can initially become quite disconnected because I'm like, I need to learn, and I love learning anyway. So it's quite a natural place kind of for me to go. So my mind and intellect will take over, and then like the emotional kind of response and kind of connection and relationship is almost left at the door. And I'm like, out of the two, if you were going to say which one would you say God wants more? He wants that heart and connection, doesn't he? Like your intellect is amazing and great, and it's pushed us forward as a society so much, but without the relational side along with that, it just becomes cold.
But Kyle, you have to listen to John Mark McMillan's original version of How He Loves Us. You have to.
Okay, I will.
I'll
put that on my homework.
But basically the thing was that, so he was a singer-songwriter who wrote this song after like his best friend died, and then it kind of got appropriated as a congregational worship song, and then people were very unhappy about the lyric "sloppy wet kiss," and it's the David Crowder Band first of all who changed it to "Unforeseen Kiss," and it's like, oh, but that's like a really normal word for it, you know what I mean? And I think what I loved about it is just like, I remember the first time I heard that song. It was on the Jesus Culture album, We Cry Out, and I was watching the DVD that comes with it, and I was like, oh, this is a nice song. And then that lyric happened, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is so fresh, and that is such an expression of, reckless and over the top and messy passion.
That's so funny how differently we think about that. Because when I first heard it, I had such a different reaction to you. I just like my entire body just like cringed. I really hope John isn't listening to this right now. I'm sorry. It just kind of, I don't know. It just it just made me cringe, because when I think of a sloppy wet kiss, I don't think of that as a good thing. I just think, ugh.
I think that's the thing, is it's not supposed to be kind of
first.
Exactly. I think it's not supposed to be like a good like romantic thing. It's just supposed to be this kind of, oh my gosh, you know, I haven't seen you in ages. I want to kiss. You know what I mean? It's just supposed to be this like, you know, messy and undignified thing, which is ultimately what Jesus did. You know, heaven met earth, like a sloppy wet kiss.
Yeah, I kind of really like it in the sense of like, I think especially in kind of the church, physical contact has been really overly sexualized. So kind of like any talk of kind of like kissing or anything, like my buddy of mine, obviously not now because of COVID. Buddy of mine, he's amazing. He's so kind of affectionate, and he'll kind of, when we see each other, he'll kind of kiss me on the cheek, and he's like one of my dude friends, and he's the most lovely, warm person, and I love it. It's just him. Do you know what I mean? I kind of look forward for those times when I'm like, hey, what's going on? And we hug each other and give each other a kiss, and it's so not sexual whatsoever, but like that would be so frowned upon in some kind of churches and places. So I like that.
Yeah, don't even get me started about sexualization in churches, because I could do a whole new podcast just on that, to be honest.
I mean, we could go there right now. I'd be happy to.
Like, as a female especially, this is something that has bothered me for a very long time. Like, even something simple like not being, and this isn't necessarily my church in particular, but this is common in quite a lot of churches. As a woman, you're told you can't wear certain things on stage.
Yeah.
For example, I have been told in the past you can't wear ripped jeans on stage because your knees will be showing.
Seriously?
What, are we in Victorian times? What?
So it can take away from the worship experience. Like, I have had Sundays at certain churches where I've been stood and instead of being thinking about God and what I'm playing, I'm stood there thinking this top is probably a little bit too tight. I'm concerned about what people are thinking about this. And then I second think that, and I'm like, no, people shouldn't be thinking anything of this. Like the female body especially is built as the female body. You don't look at it. It's not a sexual item. Like, if I am wearing a tight top, it shouldn't be a problem. Like, I shouldn't be worried about what certain people in the congregation are thinking about that. Like, that's something that's bothered me for a very long time.
So even to the point of, like, for me, I grew up and my two best friends were both girls. So I kind of naturally am more comfortable talking to like a stranger who is a woman than a stranger who is a man. I kind of just naturally can flow in conversation a bit more, and it's probably because I have had two best friends who were both girls growing up. And then I kind of came to the church, and I would make friends with like girls before men because I just felt more comfortable. And it would be like you can't be friends with them by yourself. You need to take someone with you. And it was like, what? Yeah. What are you talking about?
Gosh, yeah.
I'm not going to be friends with them so I can sleep with them. I want to be friends with this human being who happens to be a woman.
You know, and I think I guess kind of bringing it around to worship music again is like, you know, if people like even kind of sing a song together and kind of harmonize together and their voices have great synergy, people just kind of start to think like, oh, I wonder if there's something going on there. It's like, no, two good singers happen to be singing at the same time and are singing really well together. You know what I mean? And it's just
but they must be in a relationship.
Oh, exactly. So I guess that's another thing that we would change about worship culture, right?
Oh, yeah, you know 100%. I mean? Yeah.
Like, yeah, we just need to normalize friendships, right? Because if we don't
male and females being friends.
yeah, exactly. Because if we don't normalize those, then culturally, any time a man and a woman are together in a Christian context, it becomes this charged thing, even if whether they feel like it should be or not.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. It's like you almost like that way of thinking is almost kind of being counterproductive, because that way of thinking is kind of making these situations more like sexual when they shouldn't be. Because it's like, exactly. I'm with a girl. Is she looking at me? It's like,
Yeah, and it's just like, oh, because we know kind of like, regardless of whether you believe that Genesis, the beginning of Genesis, literally happened, we know how well humans do with forbidden fruit, right?
Yeah. I remember my wife went to a conference once, and I won't name check the person because I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. But she, this woman was given a preach, and it was like kind of like a couple-day conference, and she said at the end of the first day, she was like, well, you ladies, and I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember exactly what she said, but it's like something like, you ladies, like you go home, you give your husbands a good time tonight so he lets you come to tomorrow. And it was like, okay, that's all kinds of wrong right there.
Oh gosh, and especially like for people like me and Carl as well, like the inverse is true. Like me and Carl aren't really blokey blokes, are we?
Yeah, super blokey blokes.
Not like. Well, I won't tell anyone if you don't. So you know what I mean? Like we're both like really emotional, and we're both like Oh,
I cry at everything.
Yeah, and it's just like and it's just it's that whole idea of like men's conferences is when they have barbecues and drink beer, and it's just like actually quite like to just watch up and have a good cry.
It's been so nice because I haven't had like theological conversations with anyone for a while because everyone's been a bit miserable. So it's actually been so refreshing for me as well. So thank you.
No problem at all. It's been absolutely brilliant. And what a lovely place to end episode 3. It's been such a great chat. It's been so good, and like Abbie has been like a friend to me and Katie for ages, and it's just been such a pleasure to have you on on the podcast in its early fledgling days. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, like, for anyone who kind of wants to get involved with commenting, like, I know we've kind of based this podcast around 3 questions, but if anyone has kind of got anything that they think would be a great addition to those questions, whether we go to 4 or 5, send them in. Because I think, like, obviously, between the two of us, we've got these 3, but there's definitely other amazing questions that could be being asked as well. So send them in.
Absolutely. And on that note, we will see you all next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Deconstructing Worship. We hope that you got as much from it as we did. We would absolutely love to have you all involved in these conversations, so please find us at Instagram and YouTube, both under the handle at Deconstructing Worship. And please send in any emails with any questions or anything that you would love involved within any kind of future episodes. And our email is deconstructingworship@gmail.com. And we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Hi everyone, Steve here. Just a quick postscript to today's episode. We discussed with Abbie the issue of the sexualization of women in worship teams and in churches, and we felt like we didn't give that issue enough time. So later on in this series, we're going to have a Women in Worship panel where I'll be able to delve into this particular issue and other issues that affect women in worship teams in a bit more detail. So we've got that to look forward to. But in the meantime, we'll see you next week.